SDG14 from our speakers who have joined us today from various parts of the world as they focus exclusively on SDG14 and how SMEs can contribute towards achieving this global goal by 2030. I once again thank all of you for joining us today, and let me thank our partners for their unconditional support. We have with us a very special person with his keynote address. To deliver the keynote on SDG14, we have with us Mr. David Scott. Mr. David Scott is a leadership and management development tutor. He lectures in leadership and followership and has extensive commercial experience through senior leadership roles in large corporates and family businesses. He also served as an officer in the Army Reserve, where he retired as Lieutenant Colonel. David sits on a number of commercial and charity boards and is a doctoral researcher at the University of Strathclyde. He is also an active marine environment campaigner who volunteers with both Sea Shepherd UK and with British Divers Marine Life Rescue, where he is a founder member of the Large Whale Disentanglement Team. Let me invite Mr. David Scott for his keynote address. Over to you, Mr. David.
Thank you, Aparna, for such a lovely introduction. And thank you also to all of the sponsors and partner organisations who've made not only today, but this entire series possible. Is indeed, as you say, Aparna, we are at the deciding moment of our lifetimes, and what we manage to do together decides whether we as a species survive or fail. Let's see what we can do to help us survive. Now, if you'll bear with me whilst I master an unfamiliar system and get my slideshow up. And Aparna, can you see that okay?
Yes, it's perfect. Thank
Lovely.
you.
So this is rather an unusual presentation for me today. Normally, I'm used to presenting in academic circles. Everything that I put on screen is deeply researched and it's referenced to the hilt. And I could, of course, have done that, but what I want to share with you today is what I have seen personally happen to the oceans in the last 50 years. I know I don't look old enough. I grew up on the sea, on the west coast of Scotland, in fishing communities, on fishing boats. Indeed, on various occasions when as we say, my parents were between fortunes, we lived on fishing boats. And those were days if you caught fish, you ate. If you caught a lot of fish, you ate well because you could trade and barter with the local farms and local people. And if you didn't catch fish, you had to come up with another solution. And as I now understand, in those days we were very poor, but as children, you don't know you're poor, you just live in whatever environment you live in. Our environment was the ocean. And it was rich and it was precious. And even in the river estuaries, the Firth of Clyde in my case, there was so much marine life. There were cetaceans, whales of almost every description. There were basking sharks. There were porbeagles. That's one of our most common toothed sharks on the west coast of Scotland. There were bluefin tuna, a species fished to extinction in recent years, and life seemed to be plentiful. And SDG 14 talks about life below water, and I happen to think this is one of the most difficult global goals because nobody really can see below water, at least not terribly far below water. We get what we can from the various documentaries that send bathyspheres to the seabed and they document unusual findings, but we don't really see life below water. We do see all the surface damage that we're doing, all the human consumer waste plastics that are floating on the surface, and they're ugly and they're unpleasant and they spoil our beaches and they harm our tourist industries and they harm particularly marine bird life. But what we don't see is the majority of the plastic waste in the ocean, the medium and high density plastics, the waste that comes from the fishing industry in particular, and waste that comes from that clever little bauble that gets your dishes sparkling, more sparkling than a sparkling thing, and your clothes more cleaner than a clean thing, that deposit high-density plastic nodules into the ocean. They really are causing damage. But my concern, and what I've observed over half a century, is not over what we are putting into the ocean, and it is terrible. My concern is what we're taking out of the ocean and the knock-on effect which that has. And of course, as we progressed and I saw the damage that we were doing, and I saw how the oceans were becoming, the bounty of the oceans was becoming scarcer and scarcer, as I researched the not so PR-friendly animals like cod. You know, if you go to save the whales, as I do, you'll make it onto the national news. And indeed, in the example I'm about to show you, we made it onto the international news. But if you go to save just an ordinary fish, nobody's really interested because it doesn't really matter. But I've made that sort of incident the subject of my personal studies and my personal interests over the years. And so I've discovered this thing called fishing-induced evolution. What does that mean? Well, you may recall, or you may know, that fishing nets are built so that the nets have a certain gap in order to let the smaller fish escape. You're going to see a video here as well that shows you that nothing escapes from these nets. But what happens is it's only the smaller fish that are left, and so they breed. And so fish which, as a mature species in days gone past, would have been the size of me, are now less than the size of my forearm. And of course, the fishing industry waits until those are classified as actual fish, and we use fisheries-induced evolution to provide the proof for that, and then they go and they start fishing them again, and again and again and again. We deplete the oceans, we make the species less sustainable in and of themselves, we make the recovery less and less likely. And I got involved in protesting, and I got involved in lobbying, and along the way, I became involved in actual rescues, because there comes a point at which we need to acknowledge that we, humankind, are doing so much damage that only we, humankind, are going to be able to do any kind of repair job at all. And I joined British Divers Marine Life Rescue, and we noticed that the whales were coming inshore more and more often in search of food, and as they did that, they were coming into contact more and more often with human fishing equipment. And the more they did this, the more they became entangled, and the more they became entangled, the more they were at risk of dying. And indeed, I have to say, sadly, more of our call-outs are to a whale which has not survived than they are to whales which we are able to rescue. However, I'm about to show you a video. It's only a couple of minutes long, and it is part of a rescue, which in total took over 2 hours in the water and a couple of days worth of traveling at either side. But I'll try and talk you through it and just explain what's happening. And the first thing I'll point out is this is from 2016. The equipment which we use now and the procedures which we use now are much, much better, and we evolve all the time, particularly for safety. And you can see me in front of the boat, and that thin blue line is actually attached to the whale. I'm holding on. My only job at this point is to A, observe what's happening for health and safety, and B, to hold on to that line as though my life depended on it, because indeed it does, as does the lives of the other members of the crew. And Noel, who's standing there, you'll see him, he's the one wearing the goggles and the breathing tube. That's so he can look under the boat, not so he can get into the water. You saw the whale there surfacing. It's a young adult humpback. At the end of that pole, Noel has a cutting knife, and we're working at the head. The whale is actually restrained by both the head and the tail. We need to cut the head loose first, because if we cut the tail loose first, the whale will swim away. It will still have the rope tied around its head, and it won't be able to feed, and it will die anyway. So there's a set procedure which we follow. Again, you'll see in a minute what that line's attached to. So this whale has swum into some fishing creels. The green buoy you see there is a telemetry buoy. It's sending a signal. It's attached to the whale as well. Later on we will remove that. And the whale surface to breathe. And we cut the lines loose as much as we can. And we have to keep doing this again and again and again until eventually the lines are cut. Working at the tail is a lot more difficult. It's a lot more dangerous. At this point, the whale can watch us and make an assessment in his mind, we assume, of whether he's at risk or not. And there you go. You see the lobster pot. That's one of 30 that were attached to that whale.
Right, that rope's just slacker now. If I can bring this,
And this is the view from the support boat of that exact same operation. Just at the end, just after we cut the whale loose, what happened next? As I say, nowadays we wear...
Right, his mouth's clear. Yeah.
There you go, we've been successful in clearing the mouth. So now we wait until the whale calms down, until he relaxes, and then we can go back in and start to work on the tail. And you can see there the comparative size. That whale weighs about 30 tons. When we're working on the tail, if he was to flick that tail and upend the boat, then we would be in the water with a large aggressive whale that's trailing lines all over, and the risk of death is very, very high. And indeed, some of our sister organisations in North America have experienced fatalities. And we train and we work and we protect against that. Why though? And you might notice here, this whale's very close inshore. You can see buildings, you can see land. What's going on here? Why are the whales coming so far inshore? Well, nobody can ever really know for sure. It is the ocean. The whale is perfectly entitled to be there. It's far more right to be there than we do. But what we think is happening is on the high seas, we're fishing the fish stocks to absolute depletion. And so the whales have nothing left to eat. So they follow fish inshore and they get captured in our static gear lines when they get inshore. The next clip I'm about to show you is an excerpt from, it's actually the trailer from a film called The Atlantic, which features 3 communities, one in Northern Ireland, one in Newfoundland, and one in Norway. And the film itself explores the conflicts between these local indigenous fisher folk, the international industrial scale fisheries, and the oil industry. The clip doesn't feature too much on the oil industry, and I would just let you watch this one without any kind of commentary at all, and I pick up on it once it's finished.
There's a vessel in Irish waters at the moment that has been in the public eye simply because she's been hunted out of other countries around the world. Dutch-owned Lithuanian registered vessel, and when Lithuania joined the EU, they were allocated quotas to fish off the west coast of Ireland. She's there along with the rest of the Dutchmen that are fishing in Irish waters. They're not all Dutch registered. Some are Polish, some are German. They're fishing under the same quota systems as ourselves, as in Brussels divides out the cake, and they own the majority of the quota. They seem to rule the roost, and they can do what they want. It's fishing isn't done at sea anymore. It's done at tables in Brussels and in these places. And of course, the big corporations will always win out because they have the clout.
You saw two large vessels there. One was called the Margiris, the other was called the Carolex. Those are the second and third largest pelagic fishing trawlers in the world, respectively. The largest is called the Annalise Eilina, was launched as the Atlantic Dawn. To give you an idea of the amount of fish they can remove from the ocean, the Annalise Eilina is a vessel which measures 100 and over 270 feet in length, 144 meters. To put that into perspective, that's 2/3 of the size of the length of the Titanic. She has a crew of 110. She goes to sea with 2 forklift trucks in her hold to move frozen fish about the place. She can empty 400 metric tons of fish from the ocean every single day. And she can hold 7,000 metric tons of fish in her hold. She's one of 3 vessels that are fishing in those waters. Basically, we've got this very, very wrong, because that fish is not going to feed us. Most of that fish is going to feed livestock. A lot of it goes to feed salmon, and it takes 10 tons of pelagic fish to create 1 ton of consumable salmon in the salmon farms. It goes to as bait for those lobster pots that I showed you earlier on, to catch other fish, which seems to me to be absolutely mad, and crustaceans. And a lot of it goes to the, if I can just get you back, a lot of the fish goes to feed the land mammal, which consumes the greatest tonnage of fish of all. Before I tell you what that is, I need to tell you that domestic cats in the Western world consume more fish per day than all of the seals in the ocean. But the land animal which consumes the greatest tonnage of fish is the cow, particularly the dairy cow. Why? Because it increases the yield. It makes it more profitable. And I'm sure our friends in the Indian subcontinent will remember when they were little girls and boys. Paneer was something your dad might have got on special days, on high days and holidays, and the children not so much, and maybe even mum not so much at all. And nowadays, well, you could probably open a paneer shop in every single corner. So again, this is driving different types of consumerism, and we're turning protein into more concentrated protein for no obvious advantage. And as the last slide that I showed you there emphasizes, tomorrow you're going to be talking about SDG15. Well, frankly, if we get SDG14 wrong, there won't be any SDG15 to worry about, because without blue, there is no green. And if the oceans die, we die. And I'm sorry to leave you in such a somber thought, but this is such an important, such a serious issue. And thank you to Aparna, to Santosh, thank you to all our partner organisations and sponsors, and thank you especially to everyone in our audience, because the only way to stop this happening is if we all come together and start to explore what we can do differently to make our future far, far brighter than it appears to be at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David, for opening the summit today on such a powerful note. As you said, SDG 15, life on land is not possible without saving and thinking about life below water. We can see the amazing work you are doing, and the video was giving me goosebumps. Thank you so much for joining the summit today and inspiring us to do more.
Thank you, Aparna. Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much, and we'll hopefully see you all soon.
Thank you.